Welcome to this webinar featuring the paper Effect of GPS3 Weighted Voting on PY Receiver Processing Performance, published in the Winter 2020 issue of Navigation, and was written by David William Allen, Alberto Arredondo, Captain Daniel R. Barnes, John W. Betts, Alessandro P. Cerruti, Benjamin Davidson, Carl L. Kovac, and Alexander Utter. We want to point out that this paper is available to download free of charge from our website at ion.org. Today's webinar will be presented by one of the paper's authors, Carl Kovac. Carl is a principal engineer at the Aerospace Corporation in El Segundo, California. Carl has over 42 years working on various aspects of the GPS program, including 3 years as the Air Force officer in charge of the GPS control segment when it was located at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California in 1983 to 1986. He's been with the Aerospace Corporation since 2007. Carl received his BS degree in mechanical engineering from UCLA in 1978. He received the ION Weems Award in 2003 and the ION Satellite Division Kepler Award in 2012. He became a fellow of the ION in 2016. We appreciate the time and the work that Carl has put into preparing for the webinar today. Following the presentation, Carl will take questions. To ask a question, you can click on the Q&A box on the navigation bar of your Zoom browser. We also want to point out that later today, a recording of this presentation will be made available at ion.org. So Carl, thanks for being here. We'll now turn it over to you.
Well, thanks for that nice introduction, Rick. Appreciate that. Okay, it's nice that you caught the co-authors here. It was really a team effort, and I want to thank everybody who contributed to the paper and all the people that helped it as well. Lockheed Martin let us have access to their lab, all the receiver manufacturers, the codeless, semicodeless manufacturers that came and you brought their receivers, checked the signals that we reproduced in the lab, just to verify that, yes, everything was fine. It's sort of the subtitle for this work is backward compatibility. We in the GPS program take backward compatibility very seriously. I mean, it's job number one. We're modernizing GPS, but one thing we do not want to do is screw up anybody who's already using GPS. If your GPS receiver works now, it will keep working into the future. That's what backward compatibility means. So just a little bit of context here. This paper was in early January 2019. That first GPS-3 satellite, GPS-3-1, Vespucci nickname, was launched 23 December 2018. So about a month before this paper was given. But this is all work that was done well in advance of that launch, just to make sure that what we were going to launch was going to work and not perturb anybody who tracks PY. Not so much the mill receivers, we kind of had an idea they were going to be okay, especially the codeless, semicodeless, and soft decision semicodeless. And you'll see that in the slide. So let me go on to the next slide here. The overall background and motivation, this is sort of the big, let me give you the context here. The GPS-3 satellites got 5 signals and their components on the L1 carrier. There's no S there, but it should say L1 carriers. This is the rainbow slide. You see the M code, the big lumps out there to the side, the red ones? That is on a completely separate carrier. We broadcast 2 L1 carriers, 2 L2 carriers. They come out separate antennas. The M signals are on a separate antenna, have their own L1 and L2 carriers. They are not part of this problem at all. The problem, the question, the concern is on that rainbow in the middle. The pink one, the L1C pilot, the brown one, the L1C data channel, and the PY signal, the blue one, those are all combined together using a trick called majority voting. And it's a special version of majority voting that we actually use weighting. I'll show you how that works. We need to get relative power ratios correct. The CA signal, the classic, it must be backward compatible. That's that light green guy there. He's still in quadrature all by himself. But the L1C pilot, L1C data, and L1 and the PY signal are majority loaded together on the I channel. So that was where the concern was. We knew CA was fine because he was in quadrature, left alone, just like any other satellite GPS. But this combining majority vote, weighted majority vote, combining, that's the new thing. Question there, show that it's backward compatible. We think it is, but is it really? That was the question. And the big motivation for that, of course, is out of the Federal Radio Navigation Plan. We've got the quote here from the 2017, but the 2019 duplicates it, and 2021 will also duplicate it. U.S. government commits to maintaining existing L1, CAP, L2C, L2, PY characteristics to enable codeless and semicodeless receivers access. Guaranteeing that, and that's got an expiration date 2 years after 24 operational L5 satellites. But we can't violate that. That's the U.S. government plan. Make sure you're backward compatible, that those guys, those receivers, codeless and semicodeless, will work just fine and they will not complain. That's the job. So this is the work that went into showing that, yes, everything is going to be okay. Nobody will complain. Let me go on to the next slide. This is what the whole deal is with weighted majority vote. Let me walk you through the diagram. That's probably the easiest thing to look at. That's classic majority vote there. That center box, one down from the top, it says majority vote. That's classic majority vote, best 2 out of 3. If 2 of the 3 signals say it's a 1, then it's a 1. If 2 out of 3 of the signals say it's a 0, then it's a 0. Majority vote. As long as you got an odd number of voters, in this case the PY signal, L1CP, the pilot, and L1CD, the data channel. Those are our 3 voters, and as long as 2 out of the 3 say it's a 1 or a 0, that's what's going to get transmitted. So that's classic majority vote there in that center box at the top, one down. It's got the 3 inputs. You got the PY signal, L1CP, L1CD, classic majority vote. That's where you start. And then you come on down the left-hand side, that little arrow. We're going to have this little random number generator. And it's not really random, it's pseudorandom, of course. We control that so that we give a little extra boost to the PY signal once in a while. And sometimes we even override that by giving a little extra boost and extra, all votes are equal, except here we're doing weighted. To give a little extra bonus on top of that boost to the probability of the L1CP. So that way we can jack up his power net effect. You see the words off to the right-hand side, those sub-bullets. L1CP, he's a pretty hot signal. That's 158.25 dBW. He's hotter. L1CD, the data channel, is the weakest. He's almost 5 dB down. And then PY is in the middle. If you do standard majority vote, everything's going to have the equal probability of coming out, and all the powers are going to be the same. We do this weighting trick so that we can adjust the power ratios. That's important, as are the spec numbers. And of course, the satellite's controllable, so you could change those over time. But to meet the spec, there's a certain setting that you got to wait. Use to get the weightings. So that's how weighted majority voting works. But the net effect, it's sort of like adding noise to the L1 PY signal. That's the question. We're going to add more noise to the L1 PY. What's that going to do to somebody doing codeless, semi-codeless? Ooh, that's what's going to happen. That's the whole point of this study and the work that went on. So let me go to the next slide. There we go. Just to be sure, double sure, triple sure, we're going to have 3 complementary approaches, all of which will come up with the same answer. Is it going to work or is it not? Would it be backward compatible or not? Of course, here we are 2 years down the road. GPS 3-1, 2, 3, and now 4 are on orbit. And nobody's complained, but we didn't know this when we did the work, and not when we gave the paper even. So we got the analytical model. That's one thing. Let's do the math. How much impact is there going to be? Will there be a measurable impact? Computer simulation. Simulation is always a good thing. You got the math, you got the computer. We're going to do actual testing. So we have 4 different kind of receivers that we're going to run through each one of those. Conventional receivers, think of these as classic military PY receiver. They generate the full replicate. Mil receivers know what the white code signal is. They can reproduce it completely. Dual channel codeless, L1, L2. Dual channel semicodeless, and dual channel soft decision semicodeless. 3 different flavors that we have to protect for backward compatibility. Those were kind of all talked about in a companion paper with the conference. So people could just walk over to another session and see what exactly the details if they were curious. So we're going to run through those 3 complementary approaches, and you'll see that really did cover the waterfront. We got consistent results, and we were able to launch, which was a very good thing. We go on to the next slide. Before we get into that, though, there's a little bit of caveat here. Anytime you're adding noise, modulation noise, or just even thermal noise, you've got the intra-satellite interference from the satellite himself, the other signals on that carrier when you do linear combining. You've got intra-system within GPS from other GPS satellites. We're going to add these other GPS satellites on board, on orbit. They'll be contributing to interference. Sorry about that. Ringing phone. And too many spam calls. We got other GNSSs. We interfere with them, they interfere with us. It's all in that background noise calculation. And we got non-sat nav transmitters. Anybody who's in or near the band, think of legato EG. You got all the noise, and you've got the goofy people who want to try jamming GPS or GNSS. So they all come into the play here. So that's sort of the background, thermal noise and everything else. So keep that in mind as well. So let's go on to the individual approaches to show that we're good. First, let's start with the analytical on the next slide. Well, actually, we're not going to start on that yet. We're going to kind of lay it out. The 3 columns to the right, analysis, it's math, simulation that's using the computer, the actual hardware in the loop testing. What metrics are we going to go after with each one of those? Acquisition, that's kind of hardware specific. Each receiver mechanizes their acquisition their own way. So really that was only done with hardware testing. Signal loss of lock, dynamics, again, hardware. But analysis and simulation for measuring the CR and zero, knowing what to expect. We have the math. We have the computer that implements the math. We're going to get the right CR and zeros. What are we going to do? The codeless, semicodeless guys, their CR and zero. The noise and the code measurements. Carrier phase tracking error, the things that are important to codeless and semicodeless receivers. All in the background context of system noise, which we could drop out in the analysis and simulation. We couldn't drop it out, of course, in hardware testing. In fact, they had to be a little higher in hardware testing because we got real hardware in the loop. So this the background thermal noise of the simulation or the signal reproduction equipment had to get factored in. But we could make sure to drop that out for analysis and simulation. So we got 3 different ways going that we can compare and contrast, and we should all get the same results and be able to tease apart the different contributions. Now let's go to the next slide. Analysis and simulation. I'm going to show you these side by side. It's probably pretty good to walk through this at some length of time. The left-hand plot got 3 lines, one no interference whatsoever, intra-satellite and weighted voting. What's that going to mean? So the net 0 and 0, that's on the vertical scale, what the receiver is going to perceive. And K, there in dB and along the bottom, is that amplification factor, if you will, compared to the spec minimum power that's at 0 on that left-hand slide. Everybody knows when the satellites are directly overhead, you get some power from the satellite. But the satellite power increases down to about 40 degrees elevation angle because we use a shape beam, and that's the characteristic of that shape beam that we use, the 12-element transmit antenna. And of course, it goes down to minimum spec at 5 degrees above the horizon. So you've got that natural power variation. You've got power variation on the satellite. We typically run them a little bit hotter at the beginning of life. And you've got the receiver and receive antenna, which also has quite a bit of gain variation. So that all combined together, that sort of rolls up into K. How much more than the min spec power is the signal actually coming in at? So you can kind of look at that left-hand slide, start off at 0. That's if you were just at exact min receive power. As the power level goes up, higher and higher, the K gets bigger and bigger. We start to see a divergence between if there was no interference from the majority vote, weighted majority vote. If we did straight linear combining, then the weighted voting. That brown line, that's the way it should go with if there was no funny effects. But we actually see some funny effects. We actually see the impact both of combining and then of if the weighting combining. That's the red curve. You see the red curve kind of starts to drop off at higher and higher signal levels. We actually do see an effect, degradation, from weighted majority voting. You kind of see it on the right-hand plot. How much do you actually lose? So compared to the blue line, as you get up higher and higher carrier to noise ratio, you start to see more degradation at higher levels. Yes, so this is the bottom line result when all is said and done. But like the bumper sticker says, at normal conditions, at min spec, it's less than 1/10 of a dB. Degradation. And at higher and higher levels, it's still less than a dB. Now, the funny thing here, which is actually one of the best thing about it, you would care about reduction in C over N0 at low C over N0s when natural conditions. You've got satellites low on the horizon, when your receive antenna orientation is not exactly pointed up, you've got dips in your gain pattern on your receiver. That's when you care that you don't lose any C over N0 power usable. Turns out that at those low C over N0s, low meaning spec, you have no degradation. You have no measurable, no perceivable degradation. You do get degradation when you have very hot signals. Satellites 40 degrees up in the sky, your receive antenna pattern has got nice gain, plus 7 dB maybe towards that part of the sky. We're running the signals hot. So when you're coming in at 50, 55 dB hertz C over N0, you do get 1 dB of degradation, yes, but you do not care. Nobody cares. If you thought you were going to get 55 and you got 54, the receiver's going to be fine, happy. It's not going to be as wonderful. It's slightly less wonderful, but it's still wonderful. So yes, there is a degradation, but it's not meaningful. It doesn't hurt anybody. So backward compatibility says, hey, these results show shouldn't have any trouble. Nobody should complain. That's analysis and that's simulation. So let me go on to the next slide. Another way of looking at it, Again, sort of the same sort of a plot. The analysis and the simulation, deltas plus and minus. The absolute values are on the left-hand slide, but the right-hand chart kind of shows it. As you get higher and higher C over N zero, you start to get that degradation, but you're already at such high C over N zero. If you lose 0.6 of a dB, semicodeless guy, when you're at 50 dB hertz, 60 dB hertz, it's a fair trade. You're already getting very, very good signal, and it's good, but it's not very. It's very good. It's not very, very good. So it's still life is good. So that's that kind of the point we made here. The next slide. We go to that guy. Code tracking accuracy, carrier tracking accuracy. Same orientation. The spec minimum power is at 0. So as you get higher and higher Ks, more and more signal power, yes, you degrade down. You pick up a little more carrier tracking error. But again, as shown on the right-hand graph, the increase compared to what you would hope to get otherwise is less than 1/10 of a centimeter, 0.14 centimeters. That'd be 1.4 millimeters, which is pretty darn negligible when all is said and done. So a little extra noise, but not really significant in the big scheme of things, down in that millimeter kind of range, RMS. So that's what's going on with the carrier tracking accuracy. Small fraction of wavelength. Let's go on to the next slide. Maybe a little more interesting to some people. This is with, it's interesting for just the technique of how this analysis, this test was actually run. We actually went out to Harris, New Jersey. Actually had the MDU, the Mission Data Unit, hooked up one of those Averna high data recorders, wideband recorders, hooked that Averna recorder up to the RF output of the MDU and ran the MDU through its paces. So that way we had a good solid snapshot. This is what the signals actually look like at RF. Use one of the Polar RX receivers as a good calibration test, confirm. Hooked it up to the live MDU, made sure we know what we were getting out of the actual real MDU with that, as seen by that Polar RX receiver. Then on the playback, see that Averna is in the middle there. We got the MDU live signals captured by the Averna, replayed those signals, ran them also through that same Polar RX receiver, and looked at the metrics. As long as the metrics were the same, which they were, live signals versus Averna reproduced signals, that's a good sign that the Averna was not adding any untoward effects. It was faithfully reproducing what the MDU was outputting. That turned out key for the laboratory results. Well, of course, if you're going to test something in the laboratory, make sure you got a good representation of what you're testing. Let me go next slide. So we ran this in the lab out at Aerospace. They're both an arbitrary waveform generator. We got RF playback out of the Averna. We keep everything synchronized using that, takes off the waveform generator. Bring them diplex L1, L2. We had to do both frequency bands, and the Averna has the capability to do that. Ran through amplifier, isolator, splitter. We were able to hook up 8 different codeless, semicodeless, self-decision semicodeless receivers, all in parallel, sample all their data, and see, are we really getting the effect that we kind of thought we were? Negligible at low C over N0, measurable but insignificant at high C over N0. We had, I guess, with 13 different receivers come in by, I think, 8 or 9 different manufacturers. Some manufacturers brought two versions. Folks that sell to the survey community, folks that sell to the science, sell to the Iono, Novatel G3, for example, what the FAA uses for WAS. It's a pretty sensitive receiver. He's one of the guys who participated. NASA, they do a lot of spaceborne stuff, sensitive receivers. Navcom, Trimble. So we have plenty of folks to come in, and now's their chance to look and complain and try to find the differences. So the results of that testing that was done there at Aerospace. Let's go on the next slide. Show you some squiggly line charts. Right, if you have squiggly line charts, you know it's real data because the line squiggles. Things like acquisition, we could only do, it just wasn't good suited for analytical or simulation. This is actual, because everybody implements their acquisition in different ways. So we want to make sure they could acquire happily L2PY 40 seconds after they get L1CA. Make sure the carrier noise is small, the standard deviation less than 2 millimeters. Okay, so then the graph on the bottom lower left, that shows you that 2 millimeter, that's the dotted red line. What was our carrier noise? Yeah, it's all down that millimeter, 1 millimeter kind of range, up to 1.5 millimeters. But by comparison, people do different tricks, but it's all less than that 2 millimeter RMS threshold that we said that. People would really not care because you got background noise that's going to drive that anyway. It's just steady state tracking the code noise differences. How much was it going to be perturbed? That's the bottom right graph. See the two red dotted lines, one at plus 10 centimeters and one at minus 10 centimeters. So make sure you stay within that. The center line there is at 0. I hope you could read it. If not, that as long as you stay near that center, that 0, where everybody kind of is, as a function during the track period, yes, you're good. And that's what we found. That's the actual test results there. Well within that 10 centimeter code noise. So confirming what the analysis and simulation showed said, yes, the actual real receivers do perform like the simulation and like the analysis said they would. That was very, very comforting. It's like, it's great when the data matches the theory. It's always such a gratifying feeling. We go on the next guy here. Next slide. These were linearity tests. This is what we called it. Look at the C-run zeros. How did that degrade at the higher signal power levels? And yes, we kind of reproduced that. There's almost no performance degradation. Certainly not for code noise, bottom left-hand graph. Bottom right-hand graph, the carrier standard deviation of the noise. And then but the C-run zero, as perceived by the receiver, yeah, you do see that tail off. Things do drop off. You don't get quite as wonderful results as you might otherwise expect at high C-run zeros, but you're high C-run zero. You don't need perfectly wonderful, just mostly wonderful. And that's what they get. So not everybody should be very happy there. Let me go on the next slide. So summary and conclusions. Remember, this was all done pre-launch. So the bottom line answer was, after looking at all the weighted voting impacts, multiple metrics, yeah, some of those metrics, because there's not the background noise that kind of fuzzes things out anyway. We found that prediction was yes. Conventional receivers, dual channel codeless, semicodeless, no discernible impact. Discernible, that's kind of the key word there. Yes, there was measurable, but nobody would really see it because they don't know how the power is going to go up, theoretically. So they'll still get wonderful, but it's become not completely wonderful. So there was no risk really in launching the satellite. So thumbs up, went ahead and launched the satellite on 23 December 2018. We were able to give the paper and had it done January of 2019. We've since launched 4 of the GPS 3s. And reality confirms what we predicted in the paper, that bumper sticker down there at the bottom. We had pretty high confidence that yes, everything's going to be fine. And lo and behold, everything has turned out to be fine. The GPS 3s, check, are backward compatible. So that commitment was maintained. Everybody's happy. It's a great news story. And that's pretty much it. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take anything that anybody might have. And thank you.
Thank you, Carl. We appreciate that. If you do have questions, you can enter them in the Q&A tab on your browser. And while we're waiting, we just want to remind you, we will have a recording of this webinar available on our website. We've put the link in the chat bar. If you joined us late, we can also drop that in there again for you, but it's available at ion.org. We do have a quick one question here. If you get from Rita, she says, since the launches, have any manufacturers complained?
No, and that's the ultimate proof in the pudding. Nobody has complained, as predicted, as hoped. Nobody complained, and nobody has.
Great. Okay. So, Carl, we appreciate it. Looks like we don't have any questions, but we appreciate your time today, and thank you for your preparation and willingness to share this webinar with us.
Thanks, y'all, for coming and listening, and hopefully that kind of gave you a picture of, yes, the U.S. government really does care. Job number 1, backward compatibility. Don't screw up.